Ever wondered why the most irrational, impulsive, even absurd people somehow climb to the top, while wiser, quieter voices remain ignored? Carl Jung did, and he didn't blame politics. He blamed the unconscious mind of the masses. He believed that foolish leaders aren't just elected, they're summoned, not by accident, but by projection. A society that represses its shadow will eventually worship someone who embodies it. The louder the ego, the more magnetic it becomes to those who've silenced their own voice. And this is the part no one likes to admit. The rise of foolishness is rarely the fault of the leader alone. It's a mirror of a collective that forgot how to reflect. Here's the uncomfortable truth. We're not drawn to leaders who challenge us. We're drawn to those who validate our unhealed parts, the ones who promise shortcuts, scream with certainty, and distract us from our inner emptiness. You want to know how fools get into power? Easy. Just gather enough people who've never done shadow work, who are still waiting for someone to save them, and hand them a ballot. Charisma starts to look like wisdom. Loudness feels like leadership, and entire nations sleepwalk into chaos, applauding all the way. Jung warned about this exact pattern. He saw that when people abandon the journey of individuation, they become easy prey for those who pretend to lead, but secretly crave control. This isn't just a political issue, it's a psycho-spiritual epidemic. We're not in crisis because we've been fooled. We're in crisis because we wanted to be, because comfort felt better than truth, because emotional immaturity seeks parenting, not partnership. But there's another way. And in this video, we'll expose the patterns that allow the most foolish to rise, while showing you how to break the spell. We'll talk about Carl Jung's psychology, the collective shadow, the broken archetypes of leadership, and how healing, the inner child, is the most radical form of rebellion you can choose. So stay with me, because the real war isn't for power, it's for consciousness. People often ask, how did someone like that end up in power? But the better question might be, why do so many people feel drawn to someone like that in the first place? Carl Jung believed that when individuals avoid doing their inner work, the unhealed parts of themselves don't vanish, they spill into the world around them. What we refuse to see in ourselves, we project onto others. This is where foolish, dangerous, or narcissistic leaders are born, not just through manipulation, but through invitation. The collective shadow, full of unmet needs, shame, insecurity, and fear, is always looking for a mirror. And when that mirror smiles back with charm and empty promises, the crowd applauds. Think about it. We've seen it in history, again and again. People rally behind figures who speak with authority, even when they lack wisdom. Why? Because they validate the unspoken wounds of the masses. A population that has repressed its own anger will follow a leader who's allowed to scream. A people afraid of responsibility will praise a figure who promises to take care of everything. Jung warned that when the unconscious mind rules the group, logic becomes irrelevant. Emotion takes the wheel. And in that emotional fog, charisma looks like leadership. Confidence looks like competence, but neither are the same. It's not just that fools rise to power, it's that a shadow-starved society chooses them. Let's be real. It's easier to worship a strong voice than to do the work of finding your own. That's why leaders who reflect the shadow of a culture rise so easily. They act out what the public secretly feels but doesn't admit. The cruelty, the fear, the prejudice. They become embodied in a single figure who gives permission to stop pretending. And this creates a dangerous comfort. But here's the twist. The more foolish the leader, the more likely they are serving an emotional purpose, not a logical one. They're symbols, not solutions. And symbols can be incredibly seductive when your own soul feels fractured. That's why shadow work isn't optional in times of chaos. It's a civic responsibility. This is why people don't just tolerate certain leaders, they worship them. Not because they're wise, but because they fulfill a psychic need. And if you haven't done the work to see your own darkness, it's easy to fall in love with someone who wears it for you. Jung saw this as a warning. Until individuals take responsibility for their inner world, the outer world will always reflect their chaos back. And often, that reflection comes wearing a suit, a slogan, and a smile. But how does this distortion of power become so culturally accepted? For that, we have to look at the next piece of the puzzle: why society confuses charisma with wisdom. We live in a culture that often confuses being loud with being right. Charisma has become currency, and unfortunately, it spends well in a society disconnected from its depth. Carl Jung warned about this illusion. When the unconscious mind dominates public perception, appearances replace substance. The Fool King is not a joke character. He is an archetype. He rises not because of his insight, but because of his performance. He tells people what they want to hear, dramatizes what they already feel, and speaks with such conviction that the crowd assumes he must be right. This is how foolishness gets wrapped in confidence and sold as truth. The archetype of the Fool King shows up in many forms: the CEO, who rose through charisma alone, the politician who speaks in slogans, the influencer who replaces expertise with volume. These figures don't necessarily deceive the public, they reflect them. They are projections of a society that's forgotten how to think deeply. When wisdom is no longer cultivated, entertainment fills the vacuum. The problem isn't that foolish people exist, it's that we've normalized celebrating them. Jung saw this as a sign of psychic imbalance. When culture stops honoring the wise elder and starts idolizing the flashy performer, something vital is lost: discernment. You see, wisdom doesn't always come with a microphone. It doesn't always trend. It rarely screams. And because of that, it's often overlooked. That's the tragedy. The deeper the truth, the quieter it tends to speak. But charisma knows how to shout, how to dazzle, how to stir a crowd into feeling something without saying anything at all. That's why shadow work matters. It teaches us to feel beyond the surface, to look past the glitter and question the intention. Because not every confident voice is a leader, and not every leader deserves a throne. When you crave style over substance, you crown the clown. The Fool King is seductive because he speaks the language of unresolved emotions. He reflects the part of you that doesn't want to grow, that wants easy answers and quick validation. He rises because the collective has not yet matured. That's why so many smart people fall for simple ideas, because their emotional wounds haven't been integrated. Jung believed this is the danger of spiritual and psychological laziness. If we do not raise the level of individual consciousness, we create a vacuum that will always be filled by noise. But what drives the crowd to cling so tightly to these figures, even in the face of their obvious flaws? The answer lies in something far more personal: emotional immaturity looking for a savior. And here's the bitter irony: the more foolish the leader, the more fiercely some followers will defend them. Why? Because to question the leader is to question the part of themselves they projected onto that person. It's no longer about policy, it's personal. The Fool King becomes an emotional shield, a symbolic protector of inner chaos that hasn't been confronted. Jung understood that once projection takes hold, it's incredibly difficult to break. The leader becomes a myth, a savior, a father figure, or worse, a god. And if someone threatens that illusion, people react not with logic, but with rage. That's what happens when the unconscious mind is in control. Truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is comfort. And if comfort is found in a lie, the lie will be defended at all costs. This is how entire societies fall under the spell of empty voices, and how healing that collective trance requires more than facts. It requires individuation, maturity, and the courage to wake up. Most people don't want responsibility, they want rescue. It's easier to believe someone will fix everything than to admit how broken we feel inside. Carl Jung saw this pattern clearly. He taught that when people avoid their inner wounds, they naturally seek external saviors. That's why emotionally immature societies idolize leaders who offer quick fixes, simplistic answers, and grandiose promises. These figures feel familiar to the unconscious, not because they're wise, but because they activate the unhealed inner child. And when that inner child is running the show, the world is seen not as a place to grow, but as a place to be saved. This is why foolish leaders don't need to be competent. They just need to feel comforting. They know how to speak to the wound, not the wisdom. And wounded people will trade their freedom for the illusion of safety every time. Jung believed that true power doesn't seduce, it awakens. But when people haven't done the work of shadow work, they crave the seduction. They want to be told what to think, who to blame, and how to feel. The tragedy. The louder the savior screams, the deeper the follower sleeps. And in that sleep, the unconscious mind quietly builds its cage, decorated with flags, slogans, and blind loyalty. If you've ever wondered why people defend foolish leaders with religious zeal, it's not always about politics. It's about psychology. It's about emotional projection. Many are not defending a person. They're defending a hope. The hope that someone else will carry the burden they never learned to bear. This is why healing the inner child is not just personal, it's political. A society full of grown adults acting from unhealed pain is a society that will always choose the leader who promises the most, even if they deliver the least. And that's exactly what foolish leaders do. They overpromise, underdeliver, and still get applause. Because what they truly offer is not results, it's emotional anesthesia. Here's where it gets even more dangerous. Emotionally immature people not only worship the wrong leaders, they fear the right ones. A wise leader holds up a mirror. A foolish one offers a mask. One demands growth, the other offers comfort. And guess which one gets more votes in a society addicted to ease? That's why the individuation process isn't just self-help. It's soul survival. The more healed and self-aware a person becomes, the less power foolishness has over them. That's the real revolution. But let's be honest, most people would rather repeat a comfortable lie than confront an uncomfortable truth. And in that refusal, they become complicit in their own manipulation. We need to start asking deeper questions. Why do we keep putting children in thrones and calling them kings? Why do we choose leaders who mirror our wounds instead of our wisdom? Jung would say it's because we haven't grown up emotionally. And until we do, we'll continue to seek parenting from presidents, validation from celebrities, and salvation from strangers. But what if the answers weren't out there? What if the savior we keep searching for is already inside? That brings us to something even more vital: how inner maturity builds immunity to manipulation, and why individuation is the only path to true psychological freedom. Carl Jung didn't just teach psychology, he offered a blueprint for liberation, and at the heart of it was a single radical idea: know yourself or be controlled by what you don't know. This is the essence of the individuation process, becoming whole by integrating your conscious and unconscious mind. Not just knowing your dreams, but owning your darkness. Not just identifying your values, but confronting your contradictions. Because here's the hard truth: the less you know who you are, the easier it is for someone else to tell you. And foolish leaders thrive on that confusion. They don't want thinkers, they want followers. They don't lead from truth. They manipulate through projection. A person who has done deep shadow work becomes immune to cheap charisma. They've seen their own need for validation, their own hunger for control, and their own tendency to idolize authority figures. And because of that, they recognize it instantly in others. They see through the performance. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The more conscious you become, the harder it is for others to hijack your reality. Manipulation only works on those who are disconnected from their own inner authority. That's why individuation isn't narcissistic. It's necessary. Imagine two people hearing the same speech from a flashy, shallow leader. One is grounded, self-aware, emotionally mature. The other is fragmented, uncertain, still chasing approval. One feels repelled, the other feels inspired. Same message, different receiver. The first hears noise. The second hears salvation. This is how mass manipulation works. It hijacks the collective unconscious mind by speaking directly to what's unresolved. But if you've resolved it, if you've met your shadow and befriended your wounds, you're no longer an easy target. You don't need to be led in the emotional sense. You lead yourself. And that's what truly terrifies foolish rulers, people who think. Individuation also restores a forgotten quality, discernment, not the kind of shallow judgment that criticizes everything, but the deep, internal compass that quietly says, "This doesn't resonate with my soul." That's why mature people aren't easily swayed by trends, mobs, or media frenzies. They take in information, but they process it internally. They consult their values, not their fears. They understand that just because something is popular doesn't mean it's true. In fact, Jung warned that the bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes. So the task then is to resist that pull, to become so rooted in who you are that no speech, no headline, no leader can shake your core. This kind of inner clarity doesn't just protect you, it transforms you. It allows you to walk through a chaotic world without being consumed by it, to see deception without becoming cynical, to feel pain without collapsing into despair, and to witness the rise of foolishness without surrendering to it. Because the individuated person knows not every voice deserves your attention, and not every crown deserves your respect. But how does this inner strength hold up when an entire society stops listening to its own soul? That leads us to the final, and perhaps most urgent, realization. What happens when the collective sleeps and darkness rises? Darkness doesn't rise because it's powerful. It rises because consciousness is absent. Carl Jung believed that evil, ignorance, and chaos are not just out there. They grow in the cracks of collective unconsciousness. When a society stops reflecting, it starts repeating. When it avoids discomfort, it becomes addicted to illusion. And in that sleep, foolishness thrives, not because it's strong, but because it faces no resistance. That's how the unconscious mind works. What you don't bring into the light doesn't go away. It becomes your ruler. Jung called this possession by the shadow, and it applies not just to individuals, but to entire civilizations. Look around. Look, the rise of shallow leadership, mass polarization, echo chambers, and blind allegiance isn't random. It's the symptom of a spiritual crisis. When souls stop growing, systems rot. When people abandon self-awareness, they seek identity in external noise. And in that noise, the shadow speaks loudest. It says, blame them, hate them, follow him, trust no one but me. It feels powerful, it feels alive, but it's empty. A society that has forgotten how to think, feel, and connect will always crown the one who reflects its unconscious pain. And often, that crown is placed not on a wise sage, but on the loudest fool in the room. This is why healing the inner child matters more than ever, because a wounded inner child grows into an adult who doesn't vote consciously, lead with integrity, or build wisely. Instead, they react. They look for strong men to protect them, even if those men exploit them. They look for certainty, even if it's a lie. A sleeping soul doesn't care about truth, it cares about relief. But relief without awareness is how darkness wins. That's why Jung insisted that transformation must begin within. The more people avoid themselves, the more power they give to those who pretend to offer identity, meaning, or salvation for a price. So, what can be done? Jung's answer was never political. It was psychological, spiritual, internal. He believed that the only way to shift the world is to awaken the individual, not by force, not through fear, but through self-confrontation, through embracing the individuation process. That journey toward wholeness is what breaks the cycle. It's what turns projection into responsibility. It's what allows a person to look at manipulation and say, no, not this time, because they've met themselves, they've integrated their own shadow, And because of that, they are no longer moved by noise. They are grounded in knowing. The world doesn't change when power shifts. It changes when consciousness shifts. Foolish leaders rise when the collective soul sleeps. But when enough people wake up, truly wake up, they become ungovernable by fear. They become immune to the cheap spells of charisma without substance. And that's when the old systems begin to crumble. Not through revolt, through awareness, through presence, through each person saying, I choose to no longer abandon myself. Because when the soul returns to its rightful place, darkness has nowhere left to hide. And the question we must ask now is, are you awake or are you just reacting? So now you see, foolish leaders don't rise because they're clever. They rise because people are disconnected from themselves. Because the unconscious mind, left unchecked, will always seek a face to project its fears, needs, and fantasies onto. The question isn't, why do they end up in power? The real question is, why do we keep giving it to them? Jung made it clear. Until we confront our own shadows, we will continue to elect them. Until we heal our inner wounds, we will follow voices that echo them. And until we take back our minds, someone else will use them for their gain. So let me ask you, where are you still asleep? What emotional void are you expecting someone else to fill? What charisma are you mistaking for truth, simply because it feels good? These are hard questions, but answering them is how you break free from manipulation, because a person who knows themselves cannot be owned, cannot be seduced, cannot be led blindly. That's the power of shadow work. That's the gift of healing, the inner child. And that's why the path of individuation is not just personal, it's revolutionary. When you awaken, you don't just change your life, you change the kind of leaders the world allows to rise. Now I want to hear from you. What part of this message hit you the hardest? Have you ever supported a leader you later saw differently? And what made you wake up? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. If this message shook something in you, share it. Someone you know might still be under the spell. And if you want to keep digging into truth, consciousness, and the psychology behind human behavior, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this is just the beginning of what your soul already knows. But your mind is just starting to remember. And if you're truly ready to reclaim your mind, your voice, and your choices, there's one more trap you need to understand. Self-sabotage. Because sometimes the enemy isn't out there, it's within. It's the silent part of you that delays the call, avoids the risk, chases what hurts, and pushes away what heals. The part that was shaped long before you knew what was happening. And until you see it clearly, you'll keep mistaking sabotage for bad luck and sabotage for fate. So if this video woke you up, don't stop now. Watch this next. Why you sabotage yourself. It's not just another video, it's the missing piece of why you've been stuck for so long. And after everything you've just seen, trust me, you're ready for it.